Hello class. In this video I'm going to show you how to render siding, and in particular wood siding, using Illustrator. As many of you know, I like to do a lot of rendering in Illustrator. While it takes some time, it gives me ultimate control, and here's some tricks on how to accomplish some things for architecture. Now what I brought in here is a very simple perspective of a building with a window there in the center. And I've chosen to do this in perspective because it's the harder condition. If you're doing an elevation, some of these steps are simplified, and I'll talk about that through the video. Now you can get a perspective, you can draw it yourself, you can get it from SketchUp and import it as an AutoCAD file, or right from AutoCAD yourself, or Revit. Anything that has sort of hidden lines. Any modeler can bring in the lines, and you can draw right over top of it and then give again the full render and control you want. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add the siding lines, much like a hatch. Now if you're doing an elevation, a hatch in AutoCAD or Illustrator or wherever might work, but in this case we need our hatch to match the perspective. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to pull this layer down and call it siding lines. And I'm going to set my, actually no, I'm going to set my fill to nothing, and I'm going to set my stroke to black. And then I'm going to set my stroke thickness to be fairly thin at 0.5. I'm going to grab my pen tool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start on one edge, the top edge, and click across the entire top edge. You could do one wall at a time, but it actually works as both walls and will save you time. So watch what's going to happen. I'm going to do the same with the bottom edge. We don't see much right now, and that's simply because I've drawn on top of the existing lines. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the blend tool to draw all the siding lines in between. So the blend tool is right here. I need to double click to change the settings. The first thing I want to do is go to specific steps. And I'm going to set my number to 20, and yours will be change depending on the scale of your drawing, how much siding you have, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to set to 20 and say OK. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the bottom line and then the top line. And when we do that, we see it gives me 20 different segments of wood siding. And what the blend tool does is it sort of affects the distance at each point. And so what that does is it forces each individual line into the perspective so that they all match the vanishing point to the left and the vanishing point to the right, and quickly drawn horizontal siding to vanishing points. Now again, because that's oftentimes if you have a 3D modeler, that is going to be part of the texture, and the texture doesn't come in hidden lines, so you have to recreate it. Now if it's vertical siding where every line is vertical, or again if it's an elevation, simple hatches or fills would work, but using the blend tool to make your siding in perspective is quick and easy. And so we'll lock that layer. And then we need to color this siding. I should note really quick that I know it's going over this window right here, and I will address that at the end of the video. So if you don't want to see all the steps in between, go ahead and jump ahead to that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to color some of this siding. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call the layer color. And so a lot of times siding might be colored, and so I'm just going to show you how to do that simple case. It's painted. So I'm going to have the stroke set to nothing, and then select some siding color, light blue, and of course any color does not matter. And you just go to your pen tool and trace out the wall. I'm just going to do one wall here. I'm going to do this right hand wall. I'm just going to trace around each of the 4 points, close it off, and I'll lock my layer just to finish it off, and there we go. I've painted it blue. If I want to paint this other side blue, I just do the same thing. If I want to paint a different color, select a different color. I've got the color, I've got my lines. I might add any special effects because of a rendering style, but that's it, and it's done. But what I want to show you and spend more time on this video is how to make it wood siding. It's very sort of a contemporary modern thing, is to use unpainted wood, where you get to see the texture and the wood grain and all these various aspects. And so that's what I'm going to show you here. So I'm going to make a new layer to do this other wood siding on this other wall. I'll call it color 2 for layer. Of course, doesn't matter much. And I'm going to set a base color for this wood first. Now I've practiced this video, and I've gone ahead and sort of got different browns that I'll be using for the wood siding. so I didn't have to take the time in this video to do that, but I will pull up the color. If you pause the video, you can take down the numbers you see on the screen and use the same colors, but I encourage you to play with the colors and play with all the settings in this video yourself to get exactly what you want. To do the base, I'm just going to start by drawing out this object just like I did before. So essentially it's like I'm painting this siding a light brown color. There we go. Now the key is to go to your Appearances tab and add a bunch of fills that all have different textures to get the effective wood grain. And so the first one I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to this fill and I'm going to duplicate this fill and I'm going to change the color to a darker brown. In this case, because of my long-term plans, I'm going to go significantly darker. So we set it to a dark brown. Of course, it's all brown now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Effects and I'm going to go to Stylize and I'm going to go to Scribble. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my numbers. So I'm going to stay to 0 for my angle, and that's because I want my angle to, as close as possible, match the perspective. Now, because of my drawing, my horizon line is basically halfway through the wall. That makes my angle 0. But in your drawing, depending on your perspective, that angle will change based on how your wall is in perspective. But it's never going to be perfect because my lines are completely horizontal, and of course that's not the case in a perspective. It will be in a couple steps. I'll show you how to get it to match the perspective. Right now you just get it as close as you possibly can. Then you're going to go to Path Overlap, and my path overlap is significantly longer than my shape itself, and that's on purpose, because if you get too close to the edge, you start to see the scribble makes a little V shape. It sort of connects it through. You can see it down here where the overlap is not as big as it is up in the center. You get these V's, and that just doesn't look great. So the wider your path overlap, the less you see that effect. Well, a little bit of effect doesn't matter. So I'll just keep mine set at 55, but you'll have to set your number based on what you like. Overlap, then variation. Right here, 0 is perfectly fine. I'm going to make a skinny stroke for this texture because it's going to be grain, so I'm going to set that to 1 point. And I'm going to make my spacing a bit more for this particular level and my variation just a little bit lower there. And I'm going to say OK. And so this is the beginning of some wood grain here. And if you have an elevation, and you want to stop here, if you have a small area of wood or it's sort of dark and you don't see a lot of the detail, stopping at this level of wood is quite effective. You know, if it's not the main focus of your eye, then this just gives enough texture that oh yeah, that's wood. Now in this case it's not, it's the big area of my drawing, so I do want to spend more time on this. All right, so I'm going to go back to my appearances, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select on this fill only. I'm going to adjust the perspective of that scribble. So I'm going to do that by going to Effect, Style, Warp. Actually, I'm going to go to Warp, and I'm going to go to Bulge. And I've already done a test here so we can see what I've used, but I'm going to set my bend to 0 because I want straight lines effectively. And by playing with my horizontal number, you can see I can essentially change the angle of where the vanishing point is. Is it on the left? Is it on the right? How deep is it? So on and so forth. So around 23, 24 is pretty good for my drawing. This 1% can really probably be about 0. You might have some, you might be able to change the vanishing point a little bit by playing with vertical, but really it's the horizontal you want to do. If you're playing around with vertical, it probably means you need to change the angle in your scribble and get that closer together. So we're going to say okay. Actually, we're going to notice here is that this isn't as good as it can get, and I apologize for that. I'm sort of thinking ahead in my brain here, because what always happens, it always puts the bulge in the wrong spot. I want to put it under the scribble, and we can see when I do that. Let me open this up again just for demonstration purposes. It is even more clear. See how it's changing it's really now changing the vanishing point of that, and if I go the other way, the vanishing point will go to the other direction. And so so that's where you want it. So you're going to always have to apply it, and you're always going to have to pull that move down just like I did. That's just the way that tool works. And then the last thing I'm going to do to this guy is I'll probably go to the opacity, change them down a bit, say like 25, and just to really bring it in line with the rest of the tonal quality of that wall. And I'm going to set it to multiply just because as I add more fills, that'll allow that color to interact with the colors below it a little bit more. We won't see much in this case where there's just a dark color and a light color, but I'm going to add a few more fills here. Now again, that might be enough grain pattern for you. Of course, what you need to do is you have to clean up the edges of the walls here. But I'm going to add a few more fills before doing that. So jump ahead in the video if you don't want to see any more of this texture. But the more fills I add, the more quality I will get to this wood. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this same fill and I'm going to duplicate it. And we won't see much of a change happen because pretty much all the settings are set the same between these two layers. But I'm going to go down to the second one down and I'm going to change the color. Did I show the color of this guy? Let me pause really quick, open this up, take down these numbers, pause the video if you need to. And that's that color. And then this color, each brown wants to be a different color because that's how you get different tonal qualities. So I'm going to set it to this color brown. Let me open this up for you so you can see what it looks like. There's those numbers for that third color brown that I'm using. Now it already has the scribble set and it's got the warp, bulge, and the opacity, so it's lighter than what this main color is. All those settings are affected from when I copied it up there. What I want to do is keep most of them the same, but I want to change the scribble a bit. That's because I sort of see this top layer as more of grain texture, where I want these next couple layers to be sort of the wood planks themselves. So the main thing I'm going to do to change that is actually set the width to be wider. So I'm going to set that to be 3, and we can start to see it appear up over here a little bit more. And just so it doesn't overlap entirely with the layer above it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'll change my spacing to 9 as well, just so the spacing is a little off from the layer above it. We can see that produced more of an effect. We can see more of that secondary color there. That's it. And I set that and we can see, ooh, it looks even more like wood. And you might be happy with that, or you can keep going as I'm going to do. But I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take this second fill here, I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to change the color to a 4th color of brown. I'll just pull this up so you can see what it looks like. You can pause it as needed. Okay. And I'm just going to tweak the scribbles just a little bit, again, just to make sure that they are a little bit different from each other and they don't have overlaps. Of course, all the opacities and multiply are also important. They're just being carried through. And there we go. There's another layer. That might be good for you. But I'm going to do a couple more things to this before I clean up the edges. Right now it's as if these streaks of colors, they pretty much go the entire length of the wall, which is fine. And that might be what you want. But what if you have certain planks, like maybe the wall is composed of 3 lengths in one spot, 5 lengths in another, so on and so forth, and I want a random variation of darks and lights. So I'm going to show you how to do that with a couple more effects. And actually, since I'm talking about the boards themselves, it's really only going to apply to this fill, and it's only going to apply to this fill here. So I'm going to select this top fill, and it's going to use a very common thing I do, which is stained glass and cutout. So let me select this fill, go to Effects, Texture, Stained Glass. And what you want to do is you want to set the cell size of the stained glass to be about the size of your scribble. About approximately the same thickness. Doesn't have to be perfect, but approximately the same thickness. You want your border thickness as small as possible, which is 1. And I'm going to keep my light intensity at 0, although if you want it to glow a bit in the center, you might increase that if you want. And I'm just going to say OK. And we see already it starts to get a little bit of dot, so it's not just darker brown all the way through. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that same fill, and I'm going to run Effects, Artistic, Cutout. And what that's going to do when we pull up, you're going to see it's going to take away the black edge and turn it to brown. I'm actually going to set my levels to 2, my edge to 3, and my edge fidelity to 1. Essentially, it just simplifies the number of colors, and so it basically knocks out black or turns it to the darker brown color and then leaves the rest of the lines as white. So we'll say OK. And that's one reason why we have multiply here, because white disappears when you run multiply. So that segment of line that ended up not having any color except for white gets knocked out in that layer, and you see the fill below it. Essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the exact same thing to the second fill. So effects, texture, stained glass, same settings and everything. So once this comes up, I can just say OK. And I'm going to do the same cutout as well. So artistic cutout, the settings should be set. So I can also say OK. Oh, I know what happened here. I'm just going to say OK. Something happened. I think what happened was I just misclicked over here. I need to pull this cutout underneath this stained glass. Although if you like that previous effect, it was pretty cool. Go ahead and use it. But nonetheless, that's what I'm having. Now I could be happy here. I'm going to make one small tweak to it. This bulge, which sets the perspective of everything in that fill, is above the stained glass in the cutout. And I probably should pull that all the way down to the bottom just to make sure that whole segment matches the perspective. And I got to do the same to this fill as well. So I'm going to pull that down just like that. And we can see it's very, very subtle changes. Probably not even really needed. But the effect is you start to get some dark boards here, some light boards, and some color variation, sort of makes that a little more random, a little more interesting. And so you could keep going, you could keep playing with all these adjustments. I'm going to stop it there, and I'm going to show you the sort of finishing touches, which is essentially cleaning up this edge. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a mask. So I'm going to go to my transparency, and I'm going to make a mask, and of course it automatically cuts it all blank, which is perfectly fine. And I'm going to click over here to my mask, and I'm going to change my color to white, because anything I draw in white will then become what is visible. And so essentially what I want to do is I just want to retrace the edges of that wall. And as soon as I do a couple of these, you'll start to see it come through. I'll click to finish. Of course, when you're done with mask, you always want to come back to the regular drawing layer, and there we go. I've got my siding done in that way with all the extra scribbles off the edges are now gone because of the mask. And the last thing we can do is we can look at things like windows or really anything else. Perhaps this building has trim or other such things. What I like to do is I usually put my siding near the bottom of my layer structure, and then anything else can go on top of it so I don't have to worry about cutting things out like this. I could add mask, but that's not always needed. So to show that, what I mean is I'm going to go to the top of my layer list, hit new layer, and I'm going to call it window. And I know it's a windows, usually have frames and trims and things, but this is just for demonstrations. And I'm just going to select a color of a darker gray. I have many videos about how to do reflections or how to do glowing windows and so on and so forth. Of course, you should go to those to see any of those effects. But for this one, I just want to show how by using smart layer control and drawing over top, even though windows we like to think like, oh, we're seeing through it, but you don't have to think of that in your layers. Put it over top and it just blocks out everything below it, and you have your window. And that, again, that would be true for anything you want over the trim. You just draw right over top of it and have it blocked out. And that's wood grain texture. Of course, you have other things. If I want to turn off the siding lines, I could turn off the siding lines and just get the texture itself. I could have any number of fills on I want, any tones of wood, play with the settings for scribble and all those things yourself to get what you want. But this is once you get this down, it's a really quick effect to make a set of wood look the way you want to. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and good luck on your own renderings.